Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Grim Reader. I'm Kathy Grimm, and today I'm sort of still talking about books that I've finished and then we'll move into what I'm actually doing right now. Sorry for everything takes so long, but I'm finally on my break, and so it's so interesting how my whole way of being changes when I'm not teaching. But I did want to talk about this other great book, another big one that I finished a while ago, and it's percolating, and all of my thoughts on this fantastic read will be preliminary. The only other Morrison I've read is Song of Solomon, and I remember with that one, I remember loving it the beginning and being a little less happy, or just for some reason the ending didn't work as well, or the second part of the book. But I don't think I completely understood what I was getting into. And I have to say the same for Sula. I had no clue what I was getting into, and wow is all I can say. 73 it was written. I'm not sure where it is regarding where it is in terms of had she been given the Nobel. And I'm sort of dipping into, there's a lot of videos about her and her like she's at this dinner party with Oprah, and she says this thing that rings very true for writers a lot of the time, is she wrote something down. She wrote the two things down that she needs to do, otherwise she'll die. And one of them was mother her children, and the other one was write. And I do get the sense this is sort of part of my whole theory of I don't write because I don't need to. It's not essential to my core. And I think people who write, like I'm thinking of my own mother, it was really essential to her identity. And I do think that I have the feeling, unless it is essential to your identity, why would you do it? I mean, maybe I'm overstating it, but it's definitely not essential to mine. Not much is. I mean, I could make a list too, but no, I'm a different type of person, and that's fine. Per usual, these comments will be very, very, very preliminary and casual in all the stuff I say about my comments. So it's a fantastic, moving sort of novel full of life and interactions that are shocking and occurrences that are shocking and violent. There's a lot of violence, and terrible things are done to people by other people. But it does sort of, sorry, this is my room thing that comes in, the smoke. It's getting very atmospheric here. But it hones in on the relationship of Sula, the one woman who the novel is named after, and her friend Nell. And they become close friends when they're barely teenagers. They're younger than teenagers. They're kids still. So it is a book about a friendship, and it does make me think of that other book about the Italian one about the friend. It's a novel about two very different women in a certain sense. My brilliant friend, Sula's her brilliant friend, so to speak, Nell's brilliant friend. But it focuses in, it's funny how it's called Sula, and we do get, so Morrison is a really interesting writer. She's very, very a masterful prose writer. So at the level of sentences, it's very, very good stylistically. But the way she does sort of consciousness stuff, what people are thinking is sort of almost, it's not a stream of consciousness. It always seems somewhat filtered by a narrator, I would say. But it's still kind of getting into what they're thinking. So it's really interesting. The point of view is fascinating. And I did basically listen to it, and I do think I should probably read it actually through. I did look at the book. I always have the book. When I listen to a book, I always have a copy of it so I can look at things. And I think reading would have been better in a certain sense, because then you kind of let the words sink in a deeper way. Not to say that it didn't happen but when you're listening to it, what happened was the narrative kind of took over and you're just listening for the story. Not to say that it's not wonderful, but of course it's a very complicated novel, because Sula is herself such an interesting, complicated person. And so one thing, it sort of hinges on these terrible events that happen. And specifically it hinges on the way Sula reacts to terrible events. And we do have to say that, so one of the sort of questions you have when you're first listening to all of this stuff going down is she psychologically damaged, going towards something like pathology, like psychosocial pathology, because of some of her reactions? And I mean, that's one avenue you can follow, but I think we have to be more imaginative and creative about how we approach how people react to terrible things. And it is true that I have it open to one of my sort of the greatest pages for me that everything kind of hinges on, that her strange reactions to terrible events goes back to, as it says here, I'll just read out the sentence that I think is key for what Morrison's trying to do with Sula. She says here about her, as willing to feel pain as to give pain, to feel pleasure as to give pleasure. Hers was an experimental life. I love that idea of her life being an experimental life, an attempt. Ever since her mother's remarks sent her flying up those stairs, and the remarks were, she overheard her mother talking to someone else saying, I love her, but I don't like her. Like there's a gap there between the mother and the daughter, and the mother's complicated and yeah, actually, I'm thinking one of the terrible things that happens. it's the mother. If you know, you know. Anyway, so ever since her mother's remarks sent her flying up those stairs, ever since her one, okay, and it's hinting at another terrible thing that happened, sort of the first terrible thing. Ever since her one major responsibility of her feeling of responsibility had been exorcised on the bank of a river with a closed place in the middle. The first experience taught her there was no other that you could count on, so her mother or anyone. The second, which I'm not going to go into for spoilery reasons, but it is very shocking and interesting. The second experience, that there was no self to count on either. She had no center, no speck around which to grow. And see, that's the key. And I guess you could still go down the route of, is that the reason why some of her behaviors seem sort of pathological in a certain sense? And then we get an example of what this happens. So someone without a center of self or no speck, in the midst of a pleasant conversation with someone, she might say, quote, why do you chew with your mouth open? End quote. Not because the answer interested her, which would be sort of like, I would contend that could be neurodivergence, just being interested in weird stuff. So not for that reason she's doing it, no. But because she wanted to see the person's face change. Now that is pathological and it's a pleasant conversation. So everything is going smoothly to disrupt it in a kind of, because you want to see someone squirm. That's sort of like, to me, it's sort of like a metaphor for not evil, not necessarily evilness, but a lack of understanding or wanting to make other people uncomfortable. Why do people want to make other people uncomfortable? And it says here, she wanted to see the person's face change. And that's sort of because they want to see people uncomfortable. For some reason that interests them. And I guess there are different answers, power, dynamics, but it goes to cruel behavior, cruelty, going in that direction. So you know, Sula's a difficult person to connect with for that reason, but it's still a fascinating question. And so connected to her experimental life, another explanation we get is, and it's obvious that Sula and Nell, but Sula for sure is smart and sort of aware. So, well, is she aware? Somewhat. She leaves and goes to college, so she's smart in that sense. She gets kind of book learning, but it's not focused. She leaves and we stay in this little town in Ohio. So I found the other sort of side, the other half of the thing. So on the one hand, we have this sort of experimental life, and because she has no sense of self, she also seems to lack empathy, that whole thing. And it's connected to another quote here, I think, about Sula. It says, in a way, her strangeness and her naivete, her craving for the other half of her equation was the consequence of an idle imagination. So I think this is getting at to the core of her, she has this potential, but it's not being channeled in a useful way. Had she paints or clay, or knew the discipline of the dance or strings, had she anything to engage her tremendous curiosity and her gift for metaphor, she might have exchanged the restlessness and preoccupation with whim for an activity that provided her all that she yearned for. And like any artist with no art form, she became dangerous. See, that's it. And I think of some of the great artists who are also difficult people. For some reason, that is kind of a leap here. Thinking of Fassbinder, the very crazy German director whose movies are amazing. He was a movie-making genius, in my opinion, or just dramatical scenes. Yet as a person, he was pretty bad. But he was able to at least somewhat channel his imagination. And so I think what we have in Sula is someone who could have been a great whatever writer, but and it's not that it's her fault that she's not. It's more there you get into the social criticism of the patriarchal racist culture that they're growing up in. And as I just, another short video that I watched too, when a young woman was saying, she paints, she doesn't tell. So any kind, the subtle nuances of the awfulness of racism and the racist culture and society, and is just shown in such a sort of more deep and evocative manner than just saying it's that, showing the cruelty and sort of psychopathology that is in the society out of which he comes from is what's amazing about the book and Morrison in general, and just her own story that apparently she came to writing late and working hard, and we're so lucky to have had someone like her. And of course she gets sort of she's watching this video where she's at a dinner party with Oprah, you know, people kind of cling to her because she's just so amazing. I see that. Anyway, so I'm really glad. I think one day I will, it's not easy reading because it's so deep and it's not sort of cozy. She's the opposite of cozy. She doesn't want you to be cozy. She wants you to be uncomfortable, because that's what life is. Life really isn't cozy. And this obsessiveness with cozy, which I see in myself. Look at like watching videos about. It's interesting, and I don't want to sort of judge it, but it's not really what really life is about. If we get to so sort of romanticizing life, there's nothing really wrong with it, but I think it's good to be aware that it's not really all there is to it. And so, you know, when people are shocked by all the adult stuff in here, it's just people being people, and people interacting and living their lives, and how adults live. And, you know, they have a lot of sex, and they have partners, and they are cruel to each other, and they commit adultery. It's just kind of what life is, and a lot of it is because of the way society is. And I'm reminding of another thing, and a last point I'll make. So there's this fantastic idea of Sula as a quasi, not even a scapegoat, but so when she comes back and she's sort of herself, and she's doing things that could be considered cruel or whatever, or strange, you know, she's a very strange person. She has a ability to almost magically confer. So she's the ethical, because she's sort of weird, she sets the ethics for everyone else in the town, and they become better partners and everything because she's there. It's almost like so it is kind of like a scapegoat. She absorbs the negativity and the evilness, and it's not, I don't think she knows she's doing it. It just happens. It's a societal thing that this small community kind of looks to her as how not to be, or how, and then of course when she is no longer, everything kind of goes back to normal. So she fulfills this really weird function in this community, which is fascinating. I find that absolutely fascinating. And I'll never forget, I think I mentioned this already in a video, we were talking about fairy tales. Oh yeah, Little Mermaid and sacrifice, and how the ending of Little Mermaid is when she kind of gets what she wants, which is to be transcended in a certain sense, because she ultimately sacrifices for the better, for someone else, and not to get something out of it herself. And I just made this offhand comment about scapegoats, and I said, was Jesus a scapegoat for our sins? You know, is that all he was? And I think I've already said that, so I don't want to, you know, I don't have to comment on it again, but it's kind of keeps coming up, this idea of a scapegoat. Anyway, rambly thoughts about a fantastic novel that I'm very, very glad I read, and highly recommend. I'm sure a lot of you have read it already. And tell me your thoughts on Morrison, and I'll post, there's a LitHub article about Sula, which is very good. Oh no, Paris Review, sorry, I got it wrong. Paris Review has a nice, it's a nice, and it's by a writer who's also written something interesting, a new writer. Her name is Namwali Serpal, and she's written stuff. She has some books out, I think. Anyway, fantastic stuff. And I'll talk to you later. Bye!